We live in an increasingly divided world where our political parties, religious convictions, and personal identities are used to polarize and pit us against one another. As the ancient prophets wrote, "A house divided cannot stand." This division is literally tearing our world apart. The only path to create true and lasting healing in our world is to come together with civility, respect, and honesty, sharing our stories and discussing our perspectives across our deepest divides. Welcome to the Patchwork Podcast with author, pastor, and activist Brandon Robertson. In every episode, we seek to cultivate compelling conversations to help bring clarity and understanding to some of the most controversial topics of our day, with the hope of bridging our collective divides one conversation at a time. So thank you for joining us on this journey together. Let's listen to this week's conversation.
Well, welcome back to the Patchwork Podcast. It's Brandon here, and I'm really excited that you've chosen to join with us on yet another adventure as we dig into another intersection where there's a lot of cultural, religious, political divides around, and we seek to go deep together by listening in to somebody else's story, because I really believe that it's through the power of empathic understanding. Hearing another person's story, humanizing another person through understanding where they're coming from, that's how we can heal the world. And you know, in my life, one of the most transformative processes that I've went through is the reconciliation of my faith and sexuality. I'm a gay man, I'm a Christian pastor, and that intersection isn't one, as you might imagine, that's very easy to navigate, because by and large, a majority of the Christian church strongly condemns the LGBT community, LGBT behavior, activities, practicing homosexuality, however they want to refer to it. Being an LGBT person is seen by a lot of Christians, based on what I think is faulty and toxic theology, to be wrong, to be something that should be resisted, despised, and rejected. And my journey towards reconciling my faith and sexuality, it's taken years. It's taken deep theological study for me, but it's also taken a lot of inner work just to walk through the process of coming out after living a life where I felt like I had to repress who I truly was in order to fit in, not just with my religious community, but with culture at large. And as I went through the coming out process, I always say it's an incredible period of loss, but it's also an incredible period of growth and liberation. I lost a lot of opportunities, I lost a lot of friends, I lost mentors. But as I went through the process, I learned who I really was. I learned what it meant to live in authenticity and not have to live in this deceptive way where I pretended to be one thing or acted in a certain way that was out of alignment with who I knew myself to be. Today on the Patchwork Podcast, I want to introduce you to somebody that you may or may not know. His name is William Dameron, and he has written a memoir called The Lie, a memoir of 2 marriages, catfishing, and coming out. This memoir is an incredible story of a man who's walked through the journey of coming out after being in a heterosexual relationship, and after experiencing what it is to be catfished, which is essentially this modern phenomenon where people pretend to be somebody else on dating sites or sex apps and then aren't that actual person. This memoir really hits on all of the fronts of the modern reality of a single person in America today. And it also hits on the reality of what it is to come out, what kind of loss happens as we embrace our true selves, religious or not. There's so much I could say, and I'm kind of at a loss for words for how to even describe this memoir, other than it is raw, it's authentic, it's compelling, and it gives beautiful insight into the journey that so many LGBT people have, of trying to live under cultural and or religious pressure to be a certain way, and then the destructive reaction and reality that causes when you live out of alignment with your true self. Not only is the memoir incredible, but William Dameron's an incredible person, and my conversation with him went into some very deep personal stories and vignettes from his life, and also pulled out some lessons that whether you're LGBT or heterosexual or somewhere in between, there are things that you can take away as you listen in and learn from the life, the experience, the journey that William has walked. And so I hope in today's episode, it's a little bit more narrative than usual. It's less topical and more about William's life and how he's written this book. But I hope you listen in, and I hope you can glean some great insight and wisdom from the story of another. Because it's through listening in and learning from other people's experiences and stories that we heal and grow ourselves and the world around us. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you to my new friend, William Dameron. Well, first, again, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today, and also for sharing this book with the world. The Lie, a Memoir of Two Marriages, Catfishing, and Coming Out is truly an incredible book, just from a writing perspective, but then you also share so much of your own personal story, and the vulnerability in the writing is so apparent. But before we jump into the content of the book, I wanted to ask, how did you first get into writing? When did you discover that writing was something you wanted to give your time and energy and talent to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for that comment and the praise. It's really appreciated. I always wanted to be a writer, but when you're in the closet, when you try to write something, it just doesn't sound authentic. So I came out at 43 and suddenly found all of this energy and creativity that I didn't have before. And I also met this really wonderful guy, Paul, who became my husband. And when I was in the process of coming out, I was sort of looking for websites or places that might help me in my process, because I was a man who was married and had children and came out later in life. I couldn't find that. I couldn't find what I was looking for, somebody who sort of had a happy ending. So I decided to start writing that. And I started writing just little stories on my personal blog called The Authentic Life about my life with Paul after coming out of the closet. And that's how I began writing. And I sort of started looking at other writers, trying to figure out what works for them and studying the way that they write, and blended it into my own. And I would imitate them for a while until I found my own voice. So that's the process of how I started.
Totally. And something that's been apparent not just in this memoir, but as I've looked through some of your other writing, is that you have this commitment to being radically authentic and putting a lot of yourself and your experience out there. Again, this book covers so many modern realities that lots of folks are going through, whether it's just the LGBT struggle of coming out, to catfishing, to mixed families. How have
Mm-hmm.
you, what led you, first of all, to want to actually share that publicly? Because I know a lot of people look at folks like you who are writing this stuff and saying, wow, I don't know if I could ever tell people these parts of myself and tell my story so publicly and vulnerably. How did you get into a space and place where you felt like you could do that?
I think it was a process. It was sort of bit by bit. Because I lied for so many years, I just wanted to tell my truth. I wanted to tell the truth. And I started with saying, okay, life is wonderful when you become authentic. And I started with the really happy parts, the happy parts about where I was. But then I realized, really, to round out the story, I had to start with a whole process of where I was to show how far I had come. And in a way, writing this book was, for me, a way of making amends, making amends for the person, that I pretended to be, the people that I hurt by pretending to be somebody else. I can't give them back the years. I can't give my ex-wife back the years um, that I sort of took away, or my daughters, but I can tell my story and I can help other people who are struggling with becoming authentic. And I could sort of put these breadcrumbs down that gives them a path to follow. But nobody's really going to invest themselves in it unless you really expose yourself. And nobody's a perfect hero, nobody's a perfect villain. So I had to show myself as a real person.
Hmm.
And I think that resonates with readers. They trust me because I know I'm going to be honest.
Totally. Yeah. And again, we'll talk about this more in a bit, but the whole memoir being about this life of needing to lie to protect yourself and then finally stepping into authenticity, that just sounds like it will be a liberating experience to be able to declare your authentic truth in a public way, especially after having to suppress and repress for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope that it resonates with LGBTQ people, but also with everyone, because all of us sort of hide and pretend to be people at times. And I have heard from readers who are, just straight readers who say, this spoke to me on such a deep level because I've gone through the same sort of struggles.
Right.
It might not be about my sexuality, but it might be about pretending to be somebody I wasn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. In this season of Pride that we're in when we're recording this, I've done a few speaking engagements where I always try to say that same message, that this coming out process has been identified with the LGBT community, but actually every person in our society is kind of forced to conform and to hide and to repress parts of themselves in order to climb the corporate ladder or get into a school they wanted to get into or be accepted in their family or friend group. And so I do think that these narratives of LGBT people coming out actually often carry so much wisdom that resonates with other people. And I'm so glad that just in my own writing, thinking I always begin with an audience in mind. And it's clear that your book, again, while it speaks to the LGBT experience, it was written with a broader audience in mind. And I think that's such an important asset and a gift that this book offers to the world.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm not going to ask you too many of these questions of kind of sharing parts of your story because we want people to read it in the book. But one particular moment I want to take us back to, if you're okay with it, and that is the moment that you're in a Walmart parking lot with your ex-wife, Catherine, after 20 years or so of marriage, and she asks you, "Are you gay?"
Mm-hmm.
That moment, again, it resonates with me as an LGBT person, and I'm sure with so many other people, of that moment where truth kind of comes to the surface. I wonder if you can just give us a glimpse into that moment. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that is sort of a very climactic part of the book, a part of my story. I had pretended for so many years, and as a gay person in the closet, when you make this promise to be in a mixed orientation marriage, you sort of hide everything. And then year by year, step by step, everything is built on that lie: your family, your job, your house, all of that. And the deeper it goes and the longer it goes on, the harder it is to get out of that spot because you think you're going to lose everything, because you think that you'll end up alone and lonely. And it becomes wholly crushing after time. And my ex-wife could see that. She could see this man changing, not only on the inside, but physically I was changing as well. And she knew something was going on. We had gone to marriage counseling, and I had not admitted anything to her. But she had a session with the therapist one-on-one, and I think she sort of knew, it sort of niggled at her for a while. And so we went to the Walmart to get supplies, I think, for the girls. And she said, all right, Bill, just pull the car over. I have to ask you this question, or I'm afraid I never will. And she said, are you gay? And my response, it felt like there were years between the time that she asked me that question and when I finally responded. But I had to say the truest thing I thought I could say, which was, I don't want to be. I couldn't even say I was gay. I had to say what I didn't want to be. But finally, I admitted it to somebody, and there was this huge relief to me. But at the same time, I knew I was sort of taking a sledgehammer and destroying what my wife had always cherished. So it was a very, very emotional time.
Totally. Wow. And I totally resonate with that experience because, again, it's very similar to mine, and I think so many other people's experience of wrestling for so long with this part of ourselves, building a life that excludes this part of ourselves. And then when it's called forth, that there's still that inner resistance of not wanting to be identified or to admit that this is truly part of who we are. How has what's the journey in the evolution of your understanding of being gay been like since that moment of, I don't want to be gay, this is something that needs to be hidden, to today being out and proud? Like, how has that looked for you?
Yeah, what I want to refer back to too, that the coming out was very difficult, but also lying to somebody you love. When you love someone, you can't continue to lie to them. So that moment was telling the truth and continuing to lie were both an act of betrayal. But when you love someone, you can't continue to lie to them. So once I got past that part, and it was, it took a while for us to sort of move on. But I'm in a fantastic place today. If somebody had said, do you want to take this pill and it'll make you straight? At that point in my life, I would have said, absolutely. If they said that to me today, I'd say, no way. There's no possible way. Because I have found a happiness and a truthfulness and an authenticity I never thought possible. And another part of that is, as a gay person in the closet, you're always worried somebody's going to call you gay. So you can't really enjoy life. And I think there's a lot of men who are straight who adhere to this mask of masculinity, and they're not really enjoying life. So when you mentioned before about coming out, both gay people and straight people can come out. We don't have to adhere to all these rules. And when you don't have to adhere to those rules, life is wonderful.
Totally. Wow. Thank you for sharing that part. Again, all of these things are, I feel like, such a gift to be able to peer into somebody's journey. And another aspect of all of this, in the repression of our true identity, it's so clear that when we repress parts of ourselves, they'll eventually pop up in unhealthy behavior. And you talk a bit about addiction in this book and how addiction became manifest in your life, kind of as a result of the stress and the lies and the repression. Tell us a little bit about how you overcame that addiction and what the process of stepping into authenticity, how did that help you in the process of overcoming addiction?
Yeah, so there's a couple of types of addiction, I think, and one was self-medication through prescription medicine and alcohol. That was just to sort of numb the feelings. When you have these deep-seated feelings and you can't deal with them, you take the closest thing and use that to try and drown them out. The other thing that has been referred to as an addiction was a steroid addiction, which is kind of a weird thing for me to say. Like, steroids don't really give you a high, but in a way it was a psychological addiction because as a gay man and a gay child, when you feel this ugliness on the inside, all you see on the outside is ugly. When you look in the mirror, you don't see someone who's attractive. And I was always this skinny, sort of gangly kid, and I always thought that was kind of a weakness. And as the years went on, and towards the end of my marriage, I started abusing steroids. And that was sort of to shore up what was on the outside, to hide what was on the inside. The amazing thing, obviously, is once I came out, it wasn't right away that I sort of, stopped those addictions. But as I became happier, as I became the person I was meant to be, I liked what was on the outside, and I didn't have to fill it with this sort of negative stuff, the steroids or alcohol or prescription medication.
Totally. Yeah, it's just amazing how that inner alignment, when it finally begins to happen, how other things in our lives begin to flow in a more healthy and whole way. I think so many people, especially in this culture and the world that we live in, are living out of alignment or being forced into conformity to something that's not authentic to them. And then we see these widespread outbreaks of sorts of addictions to various things. And so I really love that expression of your journey as you aligned with your true identity and all the aspects of that, how that began, not miraculously, as you said, but over time to help you not need to rely on escape methods. So, yeah.
Right.
And the last big question I'll ask about the story itself is being catfished or having someone fake your identity online. That's got to be one of the biggest horrors in our modern era. I mean, I've had an experience once or twice, but there are whole TV shows about it. And it really is just terrifying. And it feels like an invasion in a way that was never possible before. Tell us a little bit about what it was like being catfished and how you got through that process and what kind of toll that took on you.
Yeah, it was kind of a different type of catfish, because somebody didn't come to me and pretend to be somebody else. I received an email from a woman who said, "Your face has meant a lot to me." And now I found out it's a lie. So she described this 4-year online relationship she had with a man who pretended to be somebody else. And he used my pictures to catfish her. And when I did a reverse search, I found out she was not the only one. 10 or 15 women have come to me to say they've been catfished using my picture, which is alarming, because you worry about, am I going to run into somebody who thinks that I had a relationship with them? But it was almost like the universe was calling me out, saying, all right, look, this is what you did. I had already written my memoir when this happened, as a matter of fact. And when this happened, it shifted my perspective from looking at the story as just what happened to me, but also looking to see what happened to the people around me. When I pretended to be somebody I was not, how did that affect them? I was able to see that every time I got an email from a woman who felt betrayed by my face. And that's exactly what I did in real life.
Wow.
So it allows me to look at my story in a very sort of current vein, and allows people to understand sort of that pain and what happens when you're catfished.
Totally. Wow. I think that's one of the most profound parts of the book that I've seen so far, is that turn that you just made of using this terrible, terrifying thing that happened, and allowing that to actually be a means of you shifting your perspective and opening yourself up to empathy for those in your life. Even though you had a hard journey, this was traumatic and painful for you. The beautiful story in this book is that there's also this movement towards redemption and achieving forgiveness with those in your life that also were suffering because of this repression. So I think that's just such a beautiful and important message that this book conveys. And kind of as we begin to land the plane, I have two more questions. One, I want to ask you to address a particular group of people that I'm sure uh, you'll be getting a lot of correspondence from in the future.
Hmm.
And that is, there are a lot of men that are in your situation that have repressed their sexuality, oppressed their gender identity, and they're in relationships and they've built lives and families. I know in the religious world that I live in, there are a lot of Christian men that just went along and got married because they thought that was the right thing to do. And now they're in this situation where they're in later in life and life feels like a prison. Um, what words of wisdom do you have for men in that situation?
I do get. I've actually already received a lot of emails from men and women. As a matter of fact, I received an email from a woman who was married for 24 years and had 4 children and then came out.
Wow.
So I know there are a lot who are sort of trapped in this story, their story, and they made this promise decades ago, many times. They made this promise and they feel bound by it, and they made the promise when there was no option. There was no option to be gay. It wasn't like it is today, more accepting. There was just no option other than, pretending to be straight. So there's a lot of shame and guilt that they feel in this situation. And I think you need to let go of that shame and that guilt. You are the way that God made you, and there should be no shame and guilt in that. A lot of men feel like if they come out, they're going to be alone, lonely and alone.
Mm.
And what I always tell them is, nobody knows who you are right now, so you're already alone and you're lonely. But the thing is, you're not the only person in this situation. There are a lot of us who are in this situation.
Yeah.
And if you love someone, just as I felt, you can't continue to lie to them, and you can't lie to yourself. And don't blame yourself for what happened to you, because society and a lot of times parents have pushed their kids into this. A lot of people think that conversion therapy happens only in an institution. It also happens at the dining room table. So I think it's important just for them to recognize that this is the way they are and this is how they are made. And you don't have to run out of the closet and declare it right away, but you can take little steps just by confiding in someone.
Totally. Thanks for sharing that, seriously. And yeah, I think, again, that message applies to not even just those that are in the closet of sexuality, but in all of the closets of our creating. Now that the book is out in the world, what is your big dream for The Lie as it gets out into the world and people start reading it? What is it that you're hoping to see, if that's even a fair question?
No, it is a fair question, and it has so many different answers. The big dream, of course, was just getting it out into the world. And I'm really excited that the New York Times did a review of it and said, this is the first book that fills this gap in the queer experience, the gay parent coming out. And I was really thrilled that my story is finally out there. And I think it took a long time because so many people who go through this process feel shame and guilt about it. And I want to get rid of that. I want to say, here's a story, you can follow it. Another dream is just that it reaches as many readers as possible that it needs to get to, that it helps not only those people who are in the closet, but their families as well. And the rest of the straight population, so that they can understand sort of what we go through. Because I think so many times it's sort of greeted with a little bit of humor, like a couple might meet another couple and the man is effeminate or has, loves to cook or has these things that people think are signs of him being gay, and then they might wink and do a sidelong glance and say, oh, he's gay, he just doesn't know it yet. I wanted to tell my story to show the seriousness of it, that it's not just a joke, that people's lives and emotions are involved.
Yep.
So that's my dream for it, to reach as wide an audience as possible.
Awesome. I think that's a perfect dream for this book. And again, I know I've said it a lot, but I really do feel grateful to have the opportunity to read the book and get to share in a bit of your story, and then also to have this chance to chat with you a bit. So thank you for taking time today, and also for sharing so much of your life with us out here in the rest of the world.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you for all you're doing with your podcast too.
Hey there, it's Brandon. And before I let you go, I just wanted to tell you about 2 quick opportunities for you to get involved with the Patchwork podcast. First, Patchwork is really a labor of love. I record it here in my office at Mission Gathering Church in San Diego, and I just try to find a couple hours each week to squeeze in interviews and for production of these podcasts. But it really does take time, effort, and money to make this podcast happen. From hosting it on the various sites on the internet, to the editing software, to getting guest interviews, it just is a taxing amount of work. And yet I do it because I love it and I believe in cultivating these conversations. So I want to ask, if you have been blessed, challenged, and inspired by Patchwork, would you consider supporting us with a monthly gift ranging anywhere from $5, that's a cup of coffee, to $500, whatever you can give, to help us continue not only to support the work that we're doing now, but to grow and expand, to improve production quality and outreach, and be able to host live events and many other fun ideas that we're thinking through in the future. If you're interested in supporting Patchwork, you can do that by going over to patchworkpod.com, clicking on Support Patchwork, which will take you to our Patreon page. Patreon's a secure website where you can set up a recurring donation every month and support this work here at Patchwork. And if you do, every person who donates on the Patreon page will get an invitation to our special closed Facebook group. This is a group where I interact weekly, where we have in-depth conversations about the episodes, where I post some candid content with some of our guests, and it really is kind of the inner circle of what's going on at Patchwork. And so anyone who donates on Patreon will be invited into that group, and it's a real stimulating and diverse group of people engaging in these very important conversations. So I hope that will be a bit of an incentive for you to head over and support the Patchwork podcast. I also just want to let you know that we are online on social media. You can follow us at our Facebook page, and you can also go over to Instagram.com and search Patchwork Pod, where we'll be posting clips of our favorite interviews, surveys, and other behind-the-scenes action. So I look forward to seeing you over on Facebook and Twitter, and I hope that you'll hop over to our Patreon page. But most of all, I look forward to seeing you again right here next week.
The Patchwork Podcast is brought to you in part by Metanoia, a center for spiritual and social renewal, and Mission Gathering San Diego, a progressive, inclusive Christian church.